As we have said from our last session, the reading from our manual will continue the subject on temptation. For today's 9th session, we will begin with this beautiful analogy. Fire tries iron, and temptation adjusts man. Man is superior than any created things in this world, for he was created in the image and likeness of God, endowed with reason, and as immortal soul, destined for all eternity to be with God. That's awesome. Iron, on the other hand, is superior when we speak of its strength, and it can be formed according to its purpose, without diminishing its strength. Iron has its strength, and so with man. But man's strength is different, because its strength depends not of itself, but in God. This is a very straightforward teaching from the imitation of Christ, of renouncing the spirit of the world. We are given today the idea of how temptation works in us. It always begins in the mind with some simple thoughts, and then slowly entering into the door of imagination, which somehow develops and produces delight. Little by little, it establishes dominion over our mind, and slowly removing from us the idea of guilt and shame, and put it in Satan's files. These files are very important for him, because at the end of our life, he will open those files and unload back to us all the shame and guilt causing us to despair. During the devil's temptation, he also creates doubt in our minds, making us to desire to become like God without God, creating doubt as to whether or not God's divine law provides a true happiness for man, and even creating doubt of God's love for us. These are the works of Satan that we must renounce. If the soul listens to this diabolical insinuation, it is lost. But there is still time to withdraw and renounce, because the will has not given its consent. But if the soul does not terminate and renounce the tempter, it is in the very proximate of danger of falling. The forces gradually weaken, and the sin presents itself more desirable. We see how important it is to practice renouncement of the spirit of the world. We must also be vigilant, most especially in the beginning of every temptation. When it happens, we must divert our attention immediately toward good from these diabolical traps. Vigilance and prayer is so important. Our Lord says in the Gospel, "Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation." By means of prayer, we will obtain from God, through Our Lady, the graces necessary to resist temptation and to be victorious over temptations. But careful vigilance and most earnest efforts would be totally not effective without the help of God's grace. With God's grace and with Our Lady, victory is infallible. So let us renounce the spirit of the world by not being slothful in resisting temptation, because by doing so, it makes us weak and the energy even more, and the enemy even more stronger than we are. Remember, sloth is one of the 7 capital sins. God, in His infinite wisdom and goodness, knows our capacity. He will not give us temptations that we cannot overcome, or crosses unbearable to carry. There is obviously a purpose why the Divine Master allows us to be tempted in this life. This is the mystery of God's providence on temptation, and how He directs such situation for the good of souls. Only God can do this, but we should not play with temptations. Following the book Imitation of Christ, here are a couple of recommendations. First, resistance. Second is fervent prayer. Saint Alphonsus de Ligori says, "He who prays will be saved, and he who does not will be condemned." This is the reason why Christ taught us to ask God the Father in the very prayer, "Our Father, lead us not into temptation." It is also reasonable to invoke the Blessed Mother who crushed the head of the serpent, and call our guardian angel whose principal duty is to defend us against the assaults of the devil. And lastly, when God allows difficult situation to happen in our life, the best move is the humble submission to the will of God.